right, let's see how that looks. Hopefully you can see the blue, and as well as the pink. Hey everybody, it's DMFaenor. Be afraid, be very, very afraid. Or not. We can just hang out and you could listen to some of my thoughts on some different player problems that keep popping up in different games. Especially problems for new players and stuff like that. So I really want to do what I can to help bring new players into a deeper, richer style of playing tabletop role-playing games. As I definitely feel that there's a lot more than just game enjoyment to them. It's a complicated pastime. It brings a lot to the table, so to speak. So with no further puns, hopefully, incidental or otherwise, we'll continue. So let's see, these all came about from just seeing different players have certain types of difficulties in deep games, lore-heavy games, or really sandboxy games, where players have all these different choices, all this information is available and thrown at players, and they're just sort of, thrown to the wolves, so to speak, to figure it out for themselves. So one of the first things that, it can't be overstated, but it's probably boring to hear, is reread the rules. Just reread them. So number one, you start in just looking over the general rules in the book. If you haven't, definitely look over those. But start with your mechanics. Start with your race, your class, your background. Start with the type of gameplay that you're interested in, and look up the mechanics for those things. If you want to grapple, read all the mechanics you can find, all the rules you can find on grappling. Understand it better, right? If you get a new class ability, look that up, play through it in your mind. Maybe watch a couple of videos on how it works. Talk to other players, especially the more experienced players at your table. Definitely talk to the GM as well. But just rereading the rules, it can obviously help clarify what your options are, how this ability can be used to your advantage in combat, or how it limits you. And that can be really, really valuable and really helpful. The other thing it does is that familiarity helps breed creativity. The more you understand the concepts being dealt with, the more you can play with them freely, And so that's where it gets really, really fun. I find that this happens around the 4th or 5th time of reading a rule set for me, where I'll read it and I understand it, sort of. I'll read it a couple more times, I'm like, okay, I'm ready to implement it, play it. But then I read it in depth 1 or 2 more times, and something will just click, and it'll just make a lot more sense. Sometimes it takes way more than that, and sometimes I understand it intuitively when I first read it. For the most part, 4 or 5 times, and then it'll really sort of click, and then I'll find myself, it'll be sort of installed in my operating system, so to speak, or just sort of back there in my subconscious, and information will come out as needed as I'm playing the character or devising the scenario as the GM. But these are player ideas, player thoughts, player advice, player tips, that sort of thing. So staying away from the GM stuff. So yeah, again, and then to touch upon that further, any stumbling blocks you have, as far as how does skills work in the game? How does this work? How exactly does my AC get calculated, or my spell save DC? How does that get calculated? Reading through those things can clarify the rules for you and help sort of get them more in the back of your head, so that you can be more creative and be more playful, and it takes less conscious thought to sort of work the rules as you're playing the game, right? So again, it sounds boring, but it's actually very, very useful. And you can do this in stages, you can do this at different points. It really does help to find different YouTube videos and such on particular rules, which I don't do a lot on specific mechanics. I do a whole lot on sort of general videos, taking a tip from Dael Kingsmill, you know what I'm saying? And so yeah. I think that's probably enough said about rereading the rules. I mean, it's pretty obvious. The more you read them, the more you understand. So enough said there. Moving on. Sometimes we can be overwhelmed with the rules, especially when we're new, or like sort of the lore and story of the world. Either way, I think trying to retain as much information as we can is really helpful. We can burn ourselves out and overwhelm ourselves pretty easily. So I think it's important when we're feeling a little bit overwhelmed to let it just sort of wash over us. Take in, but let whatever is going to stick. Keep track of what you're not super clear on, but don't worry about getting it all at once. Just learn one thing at a time. You know? But as far as lore, I think there's definitely times in games where there's so much going on. It's just a really rich world that the GM has all these different things sort of built for the player, and there's a whole history. There's a whole perhaps weather system, political structure, monetary system, trade, all these different aspects of the world for the characters to consider, especially as they get higher in levels, right? It can be really overwhelming. I think it's important to find that just let whatever interests you, grab your attention, and get clarification, find out more about it, get a better handle on it mentally by talking to the table, talking to the people. It's not important to memorize everything that's happening in a game. Since we are trying to simulate a degree of realism that makes it fun, then like real life, you can't take in every bit of information, memorize every fact, master every science. Well, not most of us, or every discipline, not most of us. We just sort of grab what we're interested in, do what works, that we enjoy, hopefully, if we can, and get better at that. Rinse and repeat, right? So I think like that, just in terms of the lore and whatever overwhelms you in the game, just sort of relax, let it wash over you. Be understandably overwhelmed, and be okay with that for a moment. Don't force yourself to not be overwhelmed or to suddenly grasp everything and memorize all these facts and put this perfect picture together of the rules structure or the game world. It doesn't matter. What matters is engage in the way that's fun for you. And that usually is follow the thing that interests you. Yeah. All right, so let's see, moving on to my next one. So I guess RP tips, RP thoughts, and by that, I mean sort of acting or dramatic description of character action and things like that. Sometimes we can be lost, especially as we're playing new players. We're playing in a new world. We don't know the table, the other players, the GM. It's a new class, it's a new setting. Any of these things can sort of throw us off and make it hard for us to figure out who our character is and how to play them, So we have our background. We'll usually come up with a little bit of story. That doesn't always tell us how the character acts and how the character moves and how they work in the world, right? What does is the general package of emotions that the character experiences most frequently. So I usually tell think about it like this, pick an emotion that your character feels a lot. Whatever it is. It could be anger, it could be confusion, it could be frustration or sadness, it could be, a desire for vengeance. It could be a number of different things, but you sort of pick that emotion they feel most commonly, and that sort of determines their mood. That's a helpful place to start, because then you've got this mood of the character laid out, and you can start determining, well, how do they react? How does this mood play out? How do they handle their mood? How do they lash out or show those feelings or not? How does it influence their perception of the world and things like that? And that can be really, really helpful in starting to determine how your character is going to act in general situations. And then in the specific, kind of the story writes itself, so to speak, right? So, yeah, I think pick an emotion, think about how that works in them over time, how they've responded to that emotion, how they carry it, how it weighs on them, if it weighs on them, and how how that impacts the other characters around them. And I think doing that can really help us, in a lot of ways, start to get a really, really, really well-rounded sense of, or help us round out and start creating the person that we're trying to play in the world. So, yeah. Moving on to my next one. Let's see here. Okay, in terms of making a character, entering a game, a lot of times we'll think of a race class combination or a certain line of feats or something like that we want to put together and that we want to play out. And then we'll maybe sort of secondarily have a backstory, or maybe we'll do that first. We'll have the story and everything, and then pick a class and everything that makes sense for them. And either of these are perfectly valid ways to make your character and begin to enter them into a world and develop them, right? I think another way, which is sort of in between or involves both, but it's sort of a slightly askew perspective on it, which is looking at the type of gameplay that you want. If you, obviously different classes can tell you that, but they don't always. So if you want to sneak, there's different options. If you want to be an intrigue-based or social character, there's definitely more than just one class that are available. With the race and background combinations, you can kind of make your character decent at any niche of the gameplay, whether it's role-playing niches or niches in exploration or combat. You have a lot of different options. So, if you all want to play a wizard, what kind of wizard do you want to play? What is the experience of the character, of the gameplay that you want? Are you looking to sort of craft items? You want to overwhelm other spellcasters? Do you want to be a battle wizard? Do you want to be a smart, safe, super protected, buff, and prepare the battlefield kind of wizard? What type of gameplay do you want to initiate? Do you want to engage in? Do you want to bring to the table? And it's just a slightly different perspective on how to build your character that I think can be useful. Or how to level up and how to grow your character, how to develop them, what new power sets or what new class to get or subclass, whether you're going to multi-class or not, or what spell options you pick up on your next level. So that can sort of be a guiding principle, as well as, well, what kind of character, what kind of what's the personality and history and background sort of dictate, and then what is just the straight class mechanics and the party role dictate. That third way is sort of, like I said, sort of involves both, but is slightly askew. So different perspectives are always useful. Let's see, what's my next one that I have on the list for you? Another sort of acting tip for narrating or sort of responding to a dramatic moment in game can be, again, it sort of harkens back to emotion, but also just looking back over the events that have happened around you and involving them in your description, consideration, narration, or your character's RP. Involving either lore or history of other characters or recent events with a villain, callbacks to other interactions with the said character can be really fun and really dramatic, and they can be a way that your character starts to develop their personality. They're clever, they remember these things and they call back these things, or they have they really respond to the other party members being hurt, or they get really angry at the sight of their own blood, and different stuff like that can be really, really helpful. Also, looking at what the person needs, or what the scenario, what the stakes are, how serious or intense it is, can really give us, it can be easy to just be in the flow of the situation, and especially if we're just playing a sort of a really simple scenario that's a very simple standardized fantasy world. It can be really easy to fall into tropes and patterns and sort of play unconsciously. So a way to bring yourself back into the moment is to, when it's your turn to act or some big event happens, check in with different things that have happened in the story. See how else this involves, or what impact this has down the road, and involve that in your character's role play and how you engage it. For example, if you know that this event is going to create another thing down the road, the person can use that to maybe persuade another character, but also that can just be a moment where that's an emotional beat for the character. And finding those emotional beats for your characters, checking in each time it's your turn to act, might just be an emotional beat, something that will fuel my character or bring some more dramatic elements into the table. Then yeah, cool, I'm going to go for it. But if not, yeah, we don't want to shoehorn those things in and just sort of shove them in where they don't belong and always be making everything a big character moment, But looking out for those things and just throwing a little bit in there can make the game a lot more fun for everybody, including us. It's another way to be involved, another level to play our character on. Because the whole, what's called the RP aspect is acting is a big part of that, and improv is a big part of, it's one of the many ways you can enjoy the game. And so it's an area to play in. And if you haven't, this can be a good way to enter into it. Just looking at character emotion, dramatic, situational framing of events, and how it might impact your character in a moment, and just taking 10 or 20 seconds and thinking about things before you act is often acceptable. You can ask the table, hey, give me a moment, I want to think about how they react. I've never had a table be mad at me when I wanted to take a moment, like, this is a serious moment, y'all, let me think about how my character would react. I've never had anyone be upset. Everyone's like, yeah, that makes sense. So yeah, sometimes we can be a little bit nervous about the spotlight. I've talked about that a little bit in another video. Anyway, moving on. So another way of personalizing your character, creating a unique person, a person that's different than the other players, is just finding something unique. And it doesn't have to matter, it doesn't have to be something magical or really powerful. It doesn't have to be something that dramatically impacts them as a character, how they act, how other people perceive them. It could be just something simple, a really unique item. If you get a signet ring in your background items, describe it. Think about what it looks like, what it's made out of. Look up other signet rings in the past and get an idea. Really play with that idea, Develop it as much as you can. And that will be, that'll bring in all sorts of other aspects of your character. You start looking at the seal on the ring and thinking about what it looks like, what it's made out of, what the history of it is, how worn it is, things like that. Can start to develop little story threads for your character, for you to tug on and see what else tumbles out story-wise, So also, yeah, unique item, yeah. Mannerisms is another one. People will have certain mannerisms their character will do over and over again. Talking with your hands, right? Let's see here. Pardon me, let me read my script over here. Yeah. Finding specific art for your character can be really, really helpful. Getting a good piece of art, and there's a bunch of AI programs on the internet that will just generate a portrait for you based on description. And it takes a little bit of finagling, but it can be really, really cool and give you some really nice images. And ArtFlow, I believe, is one of them. I'll put it in the description. But yeah, having your own decent art that you've found for it. Having a superstition or a specific belief that your character has can be a really fun way to engage in the lore or the mechanics or the culture of the world. Be a fun way to stand out or blend in. Deciding that your character is just a true believer of some particular religion and they go to the temple can be a fun way to meet new NPCs, get new aspects of the lore and world and politics, and again, help sort of develop more story threads for your character. And the more story threads you develop and dangle, the more stuff the GM can grab and weave into the game, and you can turn around and take and weave back into something else, right? Because we're taking this creative ball and tossing it around the table until we have a cool story. It's essentially what we're doing. Rolling some dice in between, just so we're not making everything up, right? Yeah, there's unique items, voices, things like that. Superstitions again, mannerisms, items. Can be a fun way to begin to develop your character and bring some specificity to them. Make them stand out from other fighters in the party or other elves in the party or whichever. Let's see, another one. So a lot of times we don't want to take up too much time. We don't want to ask too many questions because we're afraid it's a burden or it's gonna slow down the gameplay and things like that. But I think it's really important to stress that ask questions. If something's confusing you, you're a little bit overwhelmed, you don't think something's a good idea, you don't quite understand what something means or how to use a mechanic or something like that, ask questions, ask your GM, stop the gameplay for a moment, say, hey, I really don't understand this, I want to use it better. And I know it can be a little bit daunting to do that because we don't want to look stupid in front of people, but everyone's trying to create the best game they can. And if you have a table of people that are trustworthy and you've built some good trust with them, then go ahead and try that and just, hey, I'm not sure how this works. Y'all give me a minute. Does anybody understand this really well? How does this work? What's a good way to use this? And then you don't have to take their advice immediately, but it's a good way to start to understand your character better in new ways. So And in general, creating that communication is really, really helpful at the table. It doesn't matter if it slows down the game a little bit in the short term to speed up the game in the long term, or to make it more flowing or make it more fun in the long term. So that's about all I have for this evening. Sorry it's been so long since I put out a video, but I try to do quality over quantity around here. So yeah, I'm thinking about doing a video on voices next, and I'm also thinking about doing one on my map hacking techniques for cobbling maps together using MS Paint, which, I mean, yeah, I know it works, but anyway, so those are my next videos I'm thinking about. If you've got any ideas or any thoughts about what I said in my video, go ahead and leave a comment in the description, a comment in the comments. You can do that too. And yeah, I'll definitely get at you and we'll talk. I have several games I'm looking for players for, so if you're looking for any games on Tuesday or Thursday evening, go ahead and message me or find me, and we'll talk about it. As always, take care of yourself, take care of each other. If you enjoy my content and you want to support me and all that, please think about liking this video and subscribing and hitting the bell. That really helps me a lot, and it makes me feel better. So yeah, what else I got here? Yeah. Oh yeah, find me on Startplaying.games, Roll20 on Facebook, Twitter, and probably a few other to come soon. Patreon and maybe something else. But anyway, I'll see you later. And until next time, play your story. Some of my thoughts I'm going to be sharing today came from player experiences I've had, as a player. No, that's a lie. That's not true. I'm just saying things to talk. I'm not sure what I named it yet, if I named it already. But I assume I assume it's been named because you can see it now. I assume I've already named it because you can see it now. So yeah, I'm gonna not worry about cutting and all that stuff. So anyway, I can assume it's already been named. Boy, this is tough.